Hi, everybody. Welcome to Micro Focus Universe 2022. This session, your data, your reputation, and your bottom line are under attack, are hosted by myself, Greg Clark, Director of Product Management inside the Voltage and Data Privacy and Protection portfolio. I'm joined by my colleague, Ali El-Kortobi, my colleague, as I mentioned, with Director of Product Management as well. Today's session is going to take you on quite a journey. We're going to walk you through how data discovery solutions can be used in terms of helping you protect your reputation, protect your organization, and be in a better data privacy posture. Now let's hit the agenda and then we can get started. So today's session is going to cover basics. What is data discovery? How data discovery can be deployed to help you better understand data exposure, your financial risk, as well as regulatory risk. How things like application sprawl and data sprawl are really affecting your business and your peers' businesses, and then how voltage data discovery can help, or how it is helping our customers highlight risk and protect their data, while at the same time preserving it based on policy. So when we look at the market itself, when we look at the trends, there are a number of situations that every organization is faced with these days. Every organization is addicted to data. They're looking for ways to securely share it. They're looking for ways to monetize it. They're mining for information. Organizations also are really under considerable pressure in terms of unstructured data. 80 to 90% of data today is considered unused and dark and unstructured. Most organizations, though, are looking or needing to protect the crown jewels. So when you look at either insider threats or external threats, this is really critical to be able to understand where your most sensitive data is and being able to protect it. In the same light, if that information is breached and there is data loss, the risk associated with personally identifiable information leaving the organization can be great, not only from a dollars and cents perspective, where you've got 2 to 4% in terms of financial penalties, but also reputation risk is considerable as well. There is also another side of the house, and Ali's going to expand on this a little bit further, but there are a significant amount of applications and platforms and things that are getting rolled out by IT and not known by IT in terms of cloud applications where data is considered sprawling across the enterprise out into the cloud. Applications are sprawling at the same speed. But organizations are really looking to accelerate. They're looking to transform. They're looking for speed, agility, acceleration to cloud. And the thing that really starts to bring all these pieces together are global data privacy regulations. So they are a disruption to the business. So if you don't understand your information, understand where your sensitive information is and how to protect it, you can't really be in a posture to be able to respond or comply with global data privacy regulations as well. So let's start from the top when we talk about, what is data discovery. So data discovery really is a data-centric process for really understanding information, detecting things like patterns, credit card numbers, passport numbers, things that are specific to your organization. It could be purchase order numbers, right? These are the high-value assets to your organization, and really trying to understand where that information resides and whether it is a candidate to be preserved, a candidate to be protected, or a candidate to be deleted. Because if you look at data discovery through the lens of voltage, right, we look at the understanding of information, the value of information as a key aspect, the front end or the tip of the spear of this data lifecycle. But being able to combine it with data protection capabilities, data discovery can really be deployed as a real strategic tool to help you solve these broader corporate initiatives, whether it's privacy, whether it is zero trust, whether it is legal or regulatory compliance. All these practices that your organization is undertaking and programs your organization is undertaking can help or can be helped through data discovery and data protection. So one way to look at this, and Ali, I think we've worked together throughout this entire timeline along the bottom here, so for the last 12 years or so, but there's been a number of shifts that we've seen in the market when it relates to data discovery. So the size of projects, the size of data estates have increased significantly. We used to deal with project by project, department by department type scenarios. With the advent of things like global privacy, digital transformation, a lot of cloud acceleration, organizations are trying to understand this problem more centrally. But what this has done is it has started to bloat and expand these environments and the challenges associated with the data state, and in some cases to be multi-petabyte. These are massive, in some organizations, these are massive data estates. Applications at the same time were growing rapidly on their own in 2010. But as you start to progress forward to today, cloud applications, cloud migrations, Ali's going to get into a lot more depth around data and application sprawl, but they have only been compounded in 2022. Back in 2010, most organizations were simply deploying on-prem on bare iron. They were virtualizing, right? They were looking for ways to, deploy applications and be able to, wrangle data, but even back in 2010. But today, it's even complicated even more as we start looking at organizations who are aggressively making steps towards SaaS, private cloud, and cloud. And then the biggest change that we've seen is around complexity. So in a lot of ways, organizations were looking to really look for ways to cut costs, minimize storage. Back in 2010, it was very an IT focused kind of scenario. What we find today, and what we've probably found for the last 4 or 5 years, it's really been focused on more of a multi-stakeholder issue. It's not just an IT issue anymore. It's the CISO, the CDO, the CIO, right? They're interested in protecting their reputation, complying with privacy regulations, ensuring that risk and compliance measures and practices are solid, so the organization is on solid footing as it relates, to how they're managing information. And at the same time, over this period of time, we've had an increase in complexity, an increase in terms of how businesses are accelerating transformation, how cloud and unsanctioned apps have grown, as well as how the cost of simply running a business that is addicted to data, and that has been, the largest increase overall over this period. So where does data discovery fit into this mix? Like we've talked about it being deployed as a tool, right? So when we look at the complexities that I just described, data out at the endpoints, in applications, in databases, out on file shares, collaboration applications, and cloud applications, right? Cloud databases, cloud data warehouses, right? It has just ballooned and had hockey stick growth. If you look at how data discovery can help simplify a lot of that growth and align with a lot of the corporate objectives that we just described, you can use data discovery to better understand and assess risk. You can use data discovery to classify and tag information so that you can better understand it and protect it. At the same time, when you understand information and you have regulatory obligations to keep certain data for a period of time based on your records management principles, we can apply data lifecycle and classification to that data and store it, preserve it for long-term in a preservation area or archive. The other side of the ledger is once we've understood the information, when we've understood the metadata and the definitions around the data, the access, the permissions, and security around data is equally important. So for data that is in use, being able to understand how exposed special or specific sensitive information is inside your organization, and being able to take remediation steps to protect it through security and permissions is a really great way from a data access governance standpoint to be in a great position and posture for supporting things like zero trust architectures. At the same time, information and the desire and that addiction to data that I described earlier presents an interesting risk for a lot of organizations. So platforms like GitHub, Artifactory, data lakes, Hadoop data lakes, cloud data warehouses, these are all platforms that can be ignored by a lot of, and are being ignored by a lot of organizations, where information is just ported over to those environments so that it can be run through analytics, can be looked for trends, really using cloud analytics to analyze that information. Being able to protect that information, anonymize that information so that any kind of breach or loss can be nullified, but the information, the data, can still be used by data analysts and people running analytics applications, is really, really key for protecting data while it's in use. And on the unstructured side, when we look at it through the lens of documents or files that are sitting out on network file shares, is a really great example. Is how do you protect that information from leaving the organization and protect it from others inside the organizations from misuse? So what do I mean by misuse? So if there's a policy, or sorry, if there's a document that Ali and I are collaborating on, and we have a policy built into that document that won't allow either one of us to print it or repurpose that content or attach it to an email and send it outside the organization, Ali and I can still continue to collaborate on that document just like we would normally. But the protection in terms of how data can inadvertently or advertently, I don't know if that's even a word, can be protected through that policy is really, really critical to a lot of organizations as it relates to unstructured data. Now, when we look at the core use cases around data discovery and data protection, a lot of organizations will start in one area or the other. They may start with structured data, they may start with unstructured data. But I think at the end of the day, they're looking to do a number of things. They're looking to minimize their data footprint and control their costs. They're looking to understand the value of information so they can reduce the redundant, out-of-date, and trivial data. They're looking to find those crown jewels and protect them, and not just protect them so nobody can access them, but protect them in a way so the business can accelerate and still promote business growth, while at the same time protecting all the intellectual property and personally identifiable information that we uncover. So let's talk a little bit about data exposure and financial risk. So I've talked about active data. I've talked about redundant, out-of-date, trivial data, data minimization. So both types of data exist in every organization. There is data that is there just because, and because you need it. There's data that is there because nobody remembers where it is. And there's data that is there because the business needs it, right? So using data discovery to really uncover that low value work, right? That really has no business value. Is where a lot of organizations start from a minimization effort standpoint. So a lot of defensible deletion can happen at that point to control costs. That effort actually supports things like corporate sustainability. If you've got a greener, leaner policy brought down by the board, data minimization and defensible disposition is a really great strategy to deploy early on to create somewhat of a smaller haystack. So when you start analyzing the rest and you uncover your personally identifiable information, your intellectual property, those high value assets, you can then gain greater insight in terms of how it's used, who needs to have access to it, what business purpose that data has, and then most importantly, take protective action against it. So you can encrypt it. Again, we've talked about that from an unstructured data standpoint. You can tokenize it if it's data that's being pushed out into a data lake or inside of a database where you want to be able to just protect that sensitive information, but anonymize it or pseudonymize it. You can also redact it. You can mask that information depending on the use case. We can move and migrate it from an on-premise system to a cloud system, from a file share to a long-term preservation area, right? But it's really focused around how do we take the right action against the right data depending on its life cycle so that we can securely share it, defensively dispose that information, handle it properly if it's a record, be able to update metadata, preserve it from a legal hold standpoint. And this process is not linear, it's more cyclical. So data changes over time. So you need to be able to track its usage. You need to be able to understand who has access to that information, be able to remediate permissions as it changes. A lot of data can be left orphan as people leave organizations, but the permissions and security around a document aren't changed and evolved, to meet those needs as people come and leave and enter the organization. So being able to update and revoke rights, be able to add rights, to a particular individual or role, and then responding to information requests. So over time, you may get an audit, you may get a data subject access request, there may be an internal investigation or external, where you really need to be able to understand or quickly respond to these types of information requests based on the information and the insight that we've gained through data discovery. So it accelerates those types of situations. And then lastly, when we look at it through the lens of managing data through its final days, you can look at this, we've touched on, or I've touched on, defensible disposition is a key aspect. Data minimization, again, to help understand what is redundant, what is really valuable, what has a business purpose and what doesn't, allows you to take much broader steps in terms of data minimization. And at the same time, as you understand the information you have in your organization, you can archive it, you can migrate it to cheaper media or cheaper locations into things like Glacier and cloud storage. There's various different ways you can deploy data discovery as a tool that can help migrate data as well. Now on the financial side, if you look at it, and we've touched on this off the top, but from a privacy standpoint, your risk really represents roughly 4% of your annual run rate if you do not comply with data privacy regulations like GDPR. So significant. If you lose one record that has customer information, represents roughly $161. If you're a 10,000 person organization, that's 1.6 million. Right, so you've heard of a lot of breaches, on whatever .com you get your news from, or the periodicals that you read, or the news sites and newsletters. So significant loss. Ponemon Institute averages that the average data breach, is now up to 4.4 million in terms of data loss for those standard type of breaches. That doesn't take into account mega breaches, which are some of the ones that have made the front page of the Wall Street Journal and whatnot. But the actual and potential financial loss of a breach is really, really dependent on the data, right? The data types, the application that's exposed, the type of information that was actually breached. So there's a wider range beyond that 4.4 million of the average data breach, which really that study looks at each record as equal. But when you really start to drill down into those things like I described around the application, the data set, the data type, that can actually present a higher level of risk and a higher level of financial loss to the organization. But what about reputation loss, right? And I've talked about where those breaches end up showing up. So you look at the potential risk, whether it's shareholder value, reputation of the board, reputation of the firm. These are absolutely critical to any organization, right? The ability to find sensitive information, find high value data, and take the right protective action and monitor and being able to manage it over its life cycle is the best way to protect both the bottom line as well as the reputation of the firm. So Ali, I know that you've had a lot of contributions into the presentation, and we're over to your area now. So what else would you like to share with the audience that is compounding this even further?
I was stunned by what you just talked about. There were so many challenges that companies are facing. Whether they are, medium size or large companies, they all have these challenges about data privacy, respect of the different laws that are governing data privacy. It used to be that in the past, only large customers were taking care of what used to be called data lifecycle management. Is what do I do to my data over time? Because data loses value, it loses meaning over time, and at a certain point of time, it doesn't have any more value. Why would you keep, for example, an invoice for 50 years or 40 years? Okay. So let's look at it from an historical point of view. Why are we here? Why is this problem so challenging? Why is it so actually difficult to solve? When information technology started let's say in the 1960s up to 2018, why is 2018? 2018 is really when the first big data privacy law started, and that's GDPR. Right? Everybody talks about GDPR. A company was working, any company, large, small, medium, they all were working in a vacuum. They had business units and they follow some business processes to sell their products, sell their services to customers, deal with suppliers. And they needed information technology over time. Okay. And with information technology, there are two things that were developed. One is applications to represent the business processes and manage those business processes. And on the other hand, you need the data. Data is what represents the memory of what you do. So an application cannot operate if it doesn't operate on the data. So you have in one hand data, on the other hand, you have applications, and that's what information technology was all about, to support the business to fulfill its mission. On the data side, you have traditional structured data that is managed by business applications. And this usually the information technology department, which is one of the business units in any given company, this is where it started. Information technology department was taking care of business applications and structured data in the beginning. There was no pretty much management of unstructured data or collaboration applications way in the past. This all started when email applications started to come and messaging applications, and you have more and more collaboration applications that were now dealing with unstructured data. And along the way, we have applications to manage and support the business units and the business processes. And we also need data that we need to consume to be able to automate more and more business processes. And of course, it was all about growth, right? A company has to grow. But when you grow, you are going to also grow your information technology landscape. If you go to the next slide, you would see that in the 60s or 70s, maybe we had one database and one application, and maybe two. And it started actually with finance. A lot of people just started with financial application. I can do my general ledger, my account payable, my account receivable. I'm happy. Oh, wow, I can do this. Okay. And then you had, there's so many employees, I have to do payroll. Now more applications and more applications and more data and more applications and more data. And we are seeing data growing at an exponential rate, and applications that support the business process are also growing. So data proliferation is not a new phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that we could see from the beginning of information technology up to nowadays. It's just we're making it worse. Okay, the more data we need, because we have more and more applications that we can support, and data is everywhere. Data is redundant. It ended up being redundant. Why? Because even we see in companies that we have the same business process, sometimes same business unit, that is implementing multiple applications doing pretty much the same thing. Or we have mergers and acquisitions. A company buys another company. Well, they buy all the information technology assets with it. And now we have more data. Maybe we have applications that we're not going to use anymore because they are going to be replaced by the new processes in the new company, in the larger company. But that data is still going to be there. So we already see redundant data. We're going to see duplication of data. That's another one. Duplication of data is due to the fact that when you put in place an application, a new application, or a new version of an application, you're not going to trust it right away. You have to test it, for example. You have to educate the people around it. So you will see that data is going to be duplicated to serve different purposes. And while we're growing in different business processes in different departments, the IT department, the central IT department, may not even know that some data is somewhere under some desk. And that data is important to the company. That data has to be taken into account today and cannot be ignored because of what you just described, Greg. We have data privacy laws. We have data breaches. You said that. And we cannot ignore any piece of data that we may have inside the company. So this happened very steadily, very surely at any company of a size that has enough history. While data was growing, applications also are growing. We're automating more and more, and we have been automating more and more and more and more. Every business process pretty much today is automated. And is automated in multiple fashions, in multiple ways. It's automated in sometimes non-planned way. That means that the IT department was thinking about something to do or implement an application at a central to manage multiple departments on the same time. But on the same time, some department had their own budget and bought their own application and went ahead because it was maybe too slow to wait for the IT department to make his decision. And then we have fashion. Okay, some applications become outmoded over time. Why? Because, well, that application was character-based. Now we need windowing. And then after the windowing, we need to go to the web, and it has to be web-based. Oh, you know what? It's not web-based. It has to be now, what is it? It has to be microservices. Oh, right. Okay. So there is fashion even in the IT world. And applications and the way we deal with data and the way we interact with computers changes over time. The user interface changes over time. And we have new applications, and we have old applications, and we have older applications and older applications that are still running. And the information technology city looks exactly like a third world city that has been growing without planning, without control, where applications are everywhere, buildings are everywhere. Those are our applications. Data is everywhere too. And that application sprawl now is causing a huge problem for every single company of a certain size. And before the internet, this was not a problem. nobody talked about data breaches. Data breaches is a new phenomenon because you were not exposing your IT, your information technology resources, you were not exposing them before to outside. So the migration to the cloud, the introduction to internet, the fact that when we have networking now and we have networking outside of the company is actually adding to the issue. It's adding to the problem because data, and there was one slide that Greg was showing, that data now is not only on premise, but it's also outside. And data has everything you need to be able to harm you. That's where the harm to you, to your reputation, to your money comes from, is the data. So you need to protect the data. And you need to protect the data only if you understand what data you have, because you cannot protect what you don't know. What can we do? What can we do to help you here? Are we the only one, Greg, saying this, or do we have other people saying the same thing?
Yeah, it's a really good segue, Ali. When we look at a recent report, the Strategic Roadmap for Data Security Platforms put up by Gartner, just I think it was at the end of 2021. It may not be 2022 here, but most organizations are in this same position. They have policies that haven't been kept up to date. The tooling, the applications like Ali described are older, and ancient, and they really aren't able to wrangle structured or unstructured data so that they can leverage information, leverage data to help the business grow. And the risk associated with that over retention and the application sprawl really puts data at risk and at compromise. And at the same time, that puts the bottom line really at risk in terms of what may happen in terms of a breach, what may happen in terms of sanctions because of non-compliance. So there is a myriad of things that have really popped up in terms of where the market is really leaning in terms of data security platforms. So if we look at it and bringing it back to the business unit that Ali and I are in, so when we look at the Voltage portfolio, we've talked significantly around the data and the application sprawl, cloud and on-prem, and the ability to really understand information and being able to connect into those lead applications and collaborative file shares and collaborative applications, being able to understand that information through things like AI, analytics, grammars, regular expressions, the myriad of capabilities that we have to understand information, being able to understand the particular entities, the credit card number, the date of birth, the sexual orientation, the credit card or the banking information, and being able to then take action on those particular entities, whether they're in the lead application, the database, the file that you're looking at on SharePoint, and being able to mask it, being able to anonymize it, being able to encrypt that information so that the business can still use that information. But Ali, who's not in accounts receivable, does not need to know what that credit card number is for that particular individual, right? Anonymizing that information so that Ali can do his job is very critical, and is critical to that partner, that customer, wherever that data came from, that information is protected, and being able to anonymize that information is critical. The other side of it, when we look at it through the utility of information, is when someone in accounts receivable does look at that document, they should be able to see an unencrypted view. So you can actually look at it through the lens of the particular role or individual who needs to work within the data, and the policies that we have within the secure data part of the portfolio will allow both a unencrypted and encrypted view depending on the role. So we also have talked today about finding the crown jewels, finding things that need to be kept because you have an obligation to regulators, an obligation to the firm, an obligation to your department to store information for a particular period of time so that we can preserve it, apply retention rules, and defensively dispose information based on policy. So we call that data lifecycle. So we have the ability to apply records classification to data so that you can take legal hold and support legal compliance around particular documents that are responsive to a case or an audit. We can take things like the access controls and the permission security around data and being able to understand the exposure of that data and be able to remediate it through data access governance. And at the same time, if we come across data that is redundant, out of date, trivial, or has just met its business purpose, we can defensively dispose that information or archive it into a long-term repository. So I think at the at the onset, we really wanted to show a pathway in terms of how data discovery can be used and deployed in many different ways to solve many different problems, but really cut through a lot of the complexities that your organizations deal with on a day-to-day basis. I think that a good way to illustrate it in a couple different ways is Ali and I have a couple case studies. So I'm going to start. So we've got a large financial institution that was global in scale, multi-jurisdictional, very complex environment, both structured applications and databases and unstructured applications that they needed to be able to analyze and understand so that they could get in line and be in a better posture for both zero trust, but also for things like privacy regulations and specifically GDPR and KVKK, which is a Turkish similar data privacy regulation in Turkey. So they wanted to understand the information at the level of how do I understand or how do I determine where my personally identifiable information is for my customers? And how do I do that across my entire data estate? How do I, at the same time, clean up my unstructured data because there's a ton of redundant information there? And then how do I find that 5 to 10% of information that may be mismanaged or mislocated or out in the dark recesses of the enterprise that actually should be managed under policy? And how do I apply lifecycle controls across that data so that I ensure that I can meet my regulatory obligations as well? So there are, in both these examples, are larger organizations, and I don't want to give people the impression that this is just a large enterprise problem. When we look at the issues off of the top, and we talked about privacy regulations, the ability or the need to understand information and monetize it, try to promote growth around data or use data for business growth, is an issue for every organization, right? So Ali and I are going to talk about some large organizations, but if you're a mid-sized business and you still have these same challenges, you may want to take advantage of something like SaaS, which is a lot more cost efficient in terms of how you would deploy data discovery. But again, it's really at your disposal. But I don't mean to give the impression, or we don't mean to give the impression, this is just a large organization challenge where data discovery can play.
Right. I'm going to go over an example of a telecom company, large telecom company. But the problem is actually real for any other type of company. You just described a financial institution, but here's typically what you see in large companies, okay, medium-sized to large companies. Companies that accumulated a lot of data, a lot of applications over time. is they have at least 4 big types of environments. What's called usually an OLTP environment, online transaction processing environment. This is where you see what's called also production databases. Okay. You see also environments where they have reporting databases. You see environments where you have data warehouses to do business intelligence and data lakes to do same thing, business intelligence analysis, analytics, we call them today. I mean, the terminology changes over time, but at the end of the day is how can I get value out of the data I have? How can I monetize the data that I already have? And if you take any of these environments, you will see different types of databases, different types of data sources, different types of database vendors. Okay, you see the blue ones and the red ones and and the yellow ones and whatever. Okay, and here I only represented with 4 different colors, but you can imagine you have. I have seen companies have pretty much any database vendor you can dream about, including open source databases. And when you see a database, you also see applications around them. So the complexity here is always the same, whether you are a pharmaceutical company, a telecom company, a financial institution, and an insurance company, is you would have these types of environments. And then before you go to production, you may have a development and testing environment. You may have a quality assurance environment. You may have what's called usually an acceptance or pre-production environment, making sure that everything works well before I go production. And you also have a mirror environment for education and training of your own employees. So the proliferation of data, the data volumes you will have to manage, and where is the sensitive data, where is the personal data, it's everywhere. It's in all these databases. And if you think that you have, I only have my finance database, think again, you may have 3, 4, 5 copies of this finance database. And if you think you have one document on a file share, think again, you may have 5, 6 copies of that document. And so on and so forth. But think about it when you have hundreds and thousands and millions of those, when the data volumes are so big, when the number of applications you have to manage is so big, you will need the tooling, you will need the platform that enables you to manage this whole data lifecycle process, going from discovery as a start, but also as a continuum, being able to manage that data, protect it in a way that it serves the right purpose for the right consumer. If I am protecting data for an analyst, that means if I'm protecting data in a data warehouse, I will do it in a different way than I am going to do it in a production database. So the policies of protection can be different. The variety of data is very different. The volumes of data are growing and getting exponential. And you are going to need a platform that enables you to manage this whole universe of data, this whole universe of applications that you have, so that you are covered from a legal point of view, from a compliance point of view, but also from a reputation point of view.
Great, Ali. Thanks. And a couple slides just to close off, folks. And that I think that was a really important point, Ali. When we've been talking about data discovery today, as a way of using it as a precursor for all of these changing and evolving types of projects and initiatives that you have going on inside your organization. Data discovery can be that tip of the spear to help you be in a better position, whether it's for secure data analytics or secure information sharing, being in a better posture for zero trust or data privacy, ensuring that you can find information so that it can be find critical information so it can be managed throughout its life cycle, and for that from a test data management standpoint, ensuring that as IT, who is becoming a software developing shop itself, it seems in a lot of organizations, that they're not using live data when they're pushing out new builds and new applications and new tooling, so that you can essentially protect sensitive information from those unintended consequences of a software firm popping up inside your own your own walls. So with that, I'm going to leave you with a few key takeaways. So again, thanks for joining Ali and I today for our session. I think we were first out of the gate, but if you're consuming this virtually, there are a couple different sessions I think I would like to highlight from Voltage. So there's a data protection in the hybrid world, which is a great session that's coming up later on. Highly suggest you check that one out. Talks about a lot of the data protection tactics and capabilities that we were describing today in terms of protecting information while it's in use. And then another one around accelerating data privacy and protection initiatives. Again, we've touched on those. That's been a thread throughout a lot of the discussion that Ali and I have carried, throughout this whole session. And also check out the exploration zone for all the Voltage resources. You can see some demos of the products inside the Voltage portfolio as well. And with that, I will close off this session. Ali, thanks very much. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thank you.
Get social with us. Twitter, LinkedIn, Get Social, Micro Focus Universe.